Hey everyone, Luis Lima here, directly from Florida, and another edition of Spiritism, a closer look. We started last week another topic. Our first topic was evolution. It took us half a year doing that. We are now working on a different topic. It's called From France to the USA. And the purpose is to explain how Spiritism got out of France and into the USA. It's not a straight path, it's not a straight shot. There's a lot of things. So we did our first meeting last week, and we're going to continue today. As always, we do the spirit trivia at the end of each session, at the end of each meeting, and we ask you to participate by guessing your answer. So let's see what was the spirit trivia for last week. So here it is. The question was, what event in history is considered the starting point of Spiritism? And we did cover that. So we have several answers here. The Magnetism Society established in France? No. The rise of the movement known as the Age of Enlightenment? Age of Enlightenment is an important thing. We're going to discuss that today, but it's not the starting point of Spiritism. Third option C, paranormal manifestations in Hydesville, New York with the Fox sisters. Yes, that is the correct answer. That is exactly what happened. And we got two more options here. The end of the French Inquisition, nothing to do with that. And we put a fifth option here, which is maybe I should read the first paragraph of Spiritism in its simplest expression. Spiritism in its simplest expression, it's a short, it's almost like a pocket book. This book, little booklet here, it's very thin, like 30-something pages. It's written by Allan Kardak, and it's the bare minimum that people need to know Spiritism. This is a great book for those who are studying Spiritism or just getting acquainted, or they're interested in, they sympathize with Spiritism, they want to know a little bit more. That's a great book. Easy to read, fast reading, and in a day you can have a pretty good idea of what Spiritism is. So we always encourage people to read this book and going from there. So let's get to tonight's talk or meeting. Let's put it this way. So last week we saw that modern spiritualism starts with the Fox sisters. We just saw that in 1848. And we made a comment last week that was, this makes a lot of spiritualists, which were then called modern spiritualists. These people started gathering together because of things like this. The Fox sisters' house was not the only place where this was happening. There's raps and sounds and noises and everything. It was happening in different places. So modern spiritualists were trying to understand more. Some were just curious, some wanted to really understand, some wanted to research. But the problem is there was a predominance of organized religious movements here in the US. Protestantism was very predominant, so it didn't leave too much space for spiritualism to grow, to research. So some of these people who are really interested, they learned that in Europe something similar was happening, and those kind of, let's use the word barriers. Okay, so these barriers about organized religion were not really present in Europe the same way they were here. So a lot of people started moving to Europe. Those spiritualists, that starts about 3 or 4 years after the Fox sisters. So in 1852, groups of American modern spiritualists start to move to Europe because they want to know more about it, to a point that when they got there, they found out this was a much more open door than what they thought that it was going to be. They thought it was going to be more or less like here in the US, but it wasn't. It You could go to anywhere. You could see all these manifestations, all of these things. You could talk about this with people in a way that they didn't expect. So they send news back to the US and say, well, all of you who stayed behind, if you're interested in the thing, just come, because we're going to be able to, get to know more about it. So in 1853, that's a very interesting thing. A boat by the name the Washington Steamer leaves to Europe, almost 100% spiritualists. Those are people moving to Europe because they wanted to research that and leaving their land behind because they weren't getting anywhere with the research that they wanted to get. In 1854, these phenomena, these manifestations, start to be more intense, and in several different countries and areas of Europe. In small cities, larger cities, it was a spread thing. And what was happening differently from here with the Fox sisters, when we were talking about raps and sounds and noises, in Europe, it was a much more intense, the phenomena was much more intense and present in these places. We saw chairs flying, tables turning, and you would go to these places to see these events and see these things happening, these manifestations, and you could see them. So all these American spiritualists who moved to Europe to see more, they were really able to see more. They were, it was their dream to be able to participate on something like this. That's exactly what they wanted. So as of 1854, in different places, France, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, manifestations start to be more intense, and they are catching the attention of the population. People are getting interested in these things. In 1855, these manifestations make its way big time in France. And something very interesting happens because France was coming out of the French Revolution in 1789. So the country was still going through a whole process of, liberty that they didn't know before. So it was a little more, I would say, slower in France for these things to crank up than it was in other countries. But anyway, it did happen. So these manifestations were in full or fully happening by 1855. In France, they were in the beginning. They were a little late, if you want to use that word. So in 1855, things start to happen. As we know, in 1857, Allan Kardec publishes the first Spiritist book, the Spirit's Book. So this gap between 1854, 55, and 57 becomes important. So we are going to study that in a different timeline. So this timeline that we saw here is about modern spiritualism. Let's take a look at a timeline for Allan Kardec himself, the person. Okay, so let's see what happened until that same year, 1857. He was born in 1804. He was born from a family of Catholics, and he studied with Pestalozzi, which was in a school that was a special school in Europe. He was very lucky to participate in that. Of course, this is all orchestrated up there. But so he had a very special early school years, very special. So he became a teacher later on. And in 1823, so you see he's less than 20 years old, he becomes interested in magnetism. Magnetism is something that came from Franz Mesmer in Germany, which started 50 more years ago. So he became interested in that thing. You see, Allan Kardec himself, he didn't have the name Allan Kardec here yet. He was Professor Rivail. And he was a very pragmatic man. He was this technical mind type of person. Show me, I want to see, I want proof. The mind of a scientist. So you gotta show me. You show me that magnetism works, or this happens under certain circumstances. I want to know more. I want answers. So I'm gonna research. That's the kind of man he is. So in 1823, he becomes interested in these things. He starts to go to the Spiritist, to the Magnetism Society in Paris. He makes a lot of friends. One of these friends is Monsieur Fortier. This is 1823. In 1854, so we are talking here 30 years later, they were still very, very close and good friends. And they used to see each other every week, several times. So Monsieur Fortier started going to these manifestations in France, where you could see tables turning, chairs flying, different manifestations taking place. So Monsieur Fortier goes back to his friend, Professor Rivail, and says, this is what's happening. I want you to see. I want you to come with me and participate in one of these things, and just see. Come with me and let's be in one of these sessions. Well, Professor Rivail says, I don't believe in this thing. How can you tell me that tables turn and pieces of wood fly in a room? That's not for me. I'm not interested. So he kind of, sets that aside. But his friend, they were really good friends for 30 some years. He said, you got to see this because of the type of person that you are. You are this person who wants black and white answers. We don't have the black and white answers. You are the one that can, put some light on this thing. So, after several attempts, Allan Kardec or Professor Rivail said, okay, I'm going to go. It's kind of, I'm going to satisfy what you want and done with that. More or less like this. So in 1855, he goes to one of these sessions and he is totally in awe with what he saw. He did not expect anything like that at all. So he said, I want answers. Now I want my answers, my black and white answers. And so he starts to study these manifestations. And the way he studies is by reading what other people had written prior to him, of course. But most important, he starts going to these mediumistic sessions every week, once a week. Just like in Spiritist centers, we go once a week for a public lecture or a public speaker speaking about it. Same thing. He was going to all of these every week. And he started to be more active in these meetings rather than sitting in the back burner. So he said, well, we are kind of talking, if you will, to the spirits. So I have questions for them. I want my answers. And he starts writing questions to ask these questions in these sessions, and the answers would come from the spirits. Later on, that collection of questions and answers will be published in the Spirit's book. In its first edition in 1857, by the way, he never stopped after that going to these meetings. He was still going every week, so he would have more questions and answers as time goes by. So on the second edition of the Spirit's book, the number of questions and answers published is almost double, more than double than what he had on the first edition. Anyway, in 4 of these meetings, okay, sequentially, in 4 of them, the spirits gave through the mediums a mission to him. He was there. He was participating. He was attending these meetings. So the meetings would provide different types of information, but in 4 of them, the spirits were telling Allan Kardec his mission, what he was there for, and he had some serious work to be done, and they were counting on him. Very interesting. He was like, he panics. He said, I'm not sure if I can do this thing. But you see, that's the mind of a scientist. He said, there's something more than this. By accepting my mission, I will be able to know more, and I will be able to get the answers that I still don't have all the answers. He didn't at the time. It took him years to get some of the answers that he was looking for. So this is a timeline that we wanted to bring for Allan Kardec's. Allan Kardec is his name after the publication of the Spirit's book, first edition in 1857. So this is his timeline on top of the modern spiritualism timeline. Before we continue past 1857, which we're going to do next week, we need to look at history in general. We need to look at historical references to understand why this thing came about, and more or less at that time, 1857s, mid-1850s. Why is that? That's a very interesting explanation. We're going to start doing that right now. But think about this. After the publication of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec is going to produce a tremendous amount of, let's not even talk about books, a tremendous amount of written pages published telling us or passing along all the information he was receiving from the spirits, everything he knew, everything he was able to gather through the mediums in all these sessions. Beautiful work. And then the work he did, we know now as, all the books of Spiritism. But these books didn't come from nowhere. There's history behind it. So we need to look at the history on how this thing was being supported for all of this to happen. So we are going to look into some historical references. And we are going to start way back, really way back, the year 63 before Christ, BC, 63 BC. What happens in 63 BC is very interesting. The Roman Empire had been growing and growing and growing and acquired more land and more people putting more people under their control. By the year 63 BC, they had conquered two important lands with all their people. One of them was Greece. So what modern Greece, what today we call Greece, became a part of the Roman Empire. Now, the Greeks bring something cultural with them that Rome didn't have. Roman Empire didn't have, which is philosophy. If you look at the general culture in the Greek, religious culture of the Greeks, they were based on philosophy. The great philosophers come from Greece, right? There's a whole list, Socrates and Plato, and it goes on and on and on and on. So their cultural mindset was based on philosophy. What is philosophy? You need clear answers, reasonable answers for the questions that you have. So I ask you something, you reply to me, I'm going to ask you something else based on your reply, and then you give me a second answer. I'm going to make you a third question, you give me a third answer, I'm going to put a fourth question out, and so and so and so. That's philosophy, right? Rationality, thinking, critical thinking, and all of that. So with the philosophy that they had to bring some reason with it. And the reason was in the stories that they created that we came to know it, the Greek mythology. So these were stories that were justifying all the philosophy of life that they had. In terms of religious culture, heaven and hell for these people were places, physical places. Heaven was at the top of the Mount Olympus, house for the gods, and hell is below the earth, very hot. right? So that's interesting because heaven and hell for them are places, although they were very much based on philosophy. On the other land that the Roman Empire conquered, and it matters to us, is Judea, where Jews were. The Jews bring their religious culture. What is the Jewish or their religious culture? It's not based on philosophy. Philosophy is rationality, right? Questions and answers. You question everything because you want to know everything. Judaism, or the Jews, they bring their culture based on theology. What is theology? It's everything about God. So if you read the Genesis, the Mosaic Genesis, it's a rational interpretation of the Bible. It's a physical interpretation. God snaps fingers, things happen, all of that. That's theology. Theology is based on ritual and dogmas, right? And everything you can question. You cannot question. It's written in the Bible, it's written in the Bible. That's it. You cannot think about this. No, that's it. No question. Totally opposed to philosophy. However, for Judaism, heaven and hell are not places, are states of mind. That's interesting, right? They were not places, they were states of mind. So hell is your own punishment. Heaven is your reward for something you did good. So these are clearly opposing lines of thought. Both of them are acquired by the Roman Empire. So they are now have to live together, these two religious cultures or cultural systems. They have to live together under a third one that is completely different, which is the Roman culture. Roman culture is based on paganism and polytheism. They have superstitions and sacrifices and all of that, completely different than the other two. So you can say, well, Judaism has sacrifices, but it's different. For the Jews to do a sacrifice, they had to believe they were doing for a reason. They had to believe in a God. They had to do a certain thing. Superstitions and these things that the pagans did, right? They didn't believe in anything. You had to do those things. You didn't have to believe. You just have to do it. So it's different. So the Romans, with a pagan mindset, engulf these two cultures. So now we have three cultures that are not the same. There is absolutely no common point, no common ground to all of them. So obviously there's going to be a lot of conflicts. I don't mean wars, physical wars, but conflict in between systems, cultural systems. Okay? So that's in the year 63. So after the year 63, the philosophy brought in by the Greeks continues. The theology brought in by the Jews continues. And the Roman Empire adds a third leg, which is paganism. So after 63 BC, now we have three things going on at the same time until the arrival of Jesus. That changes everything. Now, this changes everything is interesting because after Jesus, paganism, not really a day or two after, with time, I mean, we're talking about maybe 1 or 2 centuries, right? After him, paganism dies. Paganism is going to die. Philosophy dies because the Jews were predominant in terms of who Jesus was. He was a Jew. So theology prevails and paganism and philosophy are left behind. So after Jesus, for a very long time, theology is the only thing remaining. So we go through a church that is very much based in theology and zero philosophy. Zero philosophy means what? I cannot ask. Nothing is askable. I cannot, no. Everything is no, you can't. So we are going to go through a very long time on that thing, on that line of thought. for 1700 years until we get to what is called the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment is something that happens in France, and it's one of the triggering points for the French Revolution in 1789. A group of French philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot, several of them, they were telling the population something more or less like this. We have been believing in everything that this church is telling us for 1700 years. We can't question, but some of the things they are telling is not making sense anymore to us. Some of these things, some of these answers are not coming. We ask questions to the church, and whatever question we put out, the answer is all the same. You can't question. This is not something you can question. So these philosophers, they go to the population. Their line of thought is, we have a brain. We have to use our brain. We cannot accept flatly what we are being told for 1700 years. So they brought back into the game philosophy. What is philosophy? Ask everything. Ask and read everything and know everything and talk about everything. No more this you cannot ask, because the answer is you cannot ask, So the Age of Enlightenment is an important turning point in the process here. So that 40 years later, when the population starts following them and accepting the idea that we have a brain, we have to question. Some of the things don't make sense anymore, like dictators and all of what was happening in France, and that will have a very important role in the French Revolution of 1789. Anyway, for us Spiritists, in 1750, philosophy makes its way back. So now, after the Age of Enlightenment, two things remain: theology that came from the old days, and philosophy, which is now back in the game. So now I still have my connection with God and everything, my belief system and so, but I can ask. I will ask. Okay? So, all right. So this goes for about 50 years until we go to the next triggering point here. And that is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution changes things because now that we can think, we can produce something logical, technical. There's a method that we have to use, and the method is that we have to develop for machines to be created, for all this promising change coming along. We have to have something solid. We have to have a lot of rationality for this thing to take place. So after the Industrial Revolution, philosophy and theology remain, but a third leg comes in place: science. What is important here for us Spiritists is not science, the academic science, is the scientific method of thinking. Methodology, scientific methodology. There's a method to do things. There's a rationale behind everything. That's why in Spiritism we have these three legs: philosophy, science, and theology, religion. So you see, Spiritism would not have been successful before 1800 because we wouldn't have the scientific methodology in place. You would not be successful before 1750 because it was going to be just another theology line of thought. So you see, everything makes sense. Everything is integrated. All of these things will lead us to the early 1800s, 1830s and 40s, when things start to change in terms of living our life. We have questions to ask. We have things to think about before we take our attitudes are going to change because there's rationality in everything that I do, or it should be that way. So you see, all of this here creates a very, very interesting scenario for Spiritism to be born in 1857. You see, Allan Kardec himself, while he was going through these manifestations, that in the first place, that's why he didn't believe in the manifestations before he saw, because he was a philosopher. So he would say, come on, I'm not going to believe in this thing. Once he saw, that changes everything, but now I want my answers. You see, that's the philosopher asking the questions and using a method that makes sense, the scientific method of asking, preparing the questions, and doing things and studying a certain thing. And that's why he was able to do all that he did, to create the books, to write the books that he wrote based on the teachings from the spirits, but everything had a method. Everything had a reason. Okay, so for next week, we're going to continue from here. We're going to see how Spiritism gets momentum in France and becomes really something popular, and what happens after Allan Kardec dies, and that by itself changes a lot, changes everything. And Spiritism is going to really, we could say, walk away from France, and it will be reborn, if you will, in Brazil. And that's what we're going to discuss next week. You're listening to us, and don't forget our Spirit Trivia, right? Do not forget to go online and participate with us. Go to weekly.spirittrivia.com. There's a question for you that we just published now. Once again, we do not collect any information from you. It's 100% anonymous, no email addresses, no names, no IP addresses, nothing like this. No cookies on your computer. So please participate with us. We're all learning, so it's good. And as always, if you have any comments, any questions, any suggestions, just write to us. Just go to kardakradio.com and fill out the form with your comments and questions and suggestions. Thank you very much for participating with us once again, and we will see you next week. Goodbye, stay well.